All right, we're almost done. We're earthquake damage. Some earthquakes we can't even feel. Remember, there are millions of earthquakes a year. Most of those we don't even feel. Some of them are pretty big, like a 4 or 5, we would feel that. A 6, 7, 8, 9, those when we really get damage. And the damage can be really devastating, kills lots of people when buildings fall. And there's several different processes that can happen to cause all that damage. The ground shaking. So the length of time the ground shakes and the intensity of that shaking matters. So the distance from the earthquake is going to matter. Further away, there's going to be less shaking than closer to the epicenter or the focus epicenter. The P wave is going to arrive and cause lots of up and down motion. The S wave is going to arrive and generate that back and forth motion on the surface. Those S waves where you're ripping back and forth, they're going to cause a lot of the damage from the earthquake. It took me a while to realize what this picture is. It's like a maybe a tower with electrical wires that are whipping back and forth. So the love waves are going to maybe break apart train tracks as the waves move through. The Raleigh waves are moving up and down like that, and the ground's moving, maybe snapping electrical lines. When all that shaking occurs, concrete is going to crumble, and if it's not reinforced very well with these steel rebar, then it's going to cause damage. And it doesn't matter how much rebar you have, you still can flatten an area because of lots of shaking. So the damage is going to depend on how much energy there is, how much motion there is, how far you are from that focus, how long the shaking occurs. If it's a little jolt and stops, it could be minimal damage, but if it continues to shake, it could cause much more damage. Bedrock transmits seismic waves in a way that we have less damage, whereas if the buildings are built on soft ground, not in bedrock, there can be a lot more damage. So sedimentary basins with buildings on them like San Francisco, Mexico City, those New York City, parts of New York, not all of it, some of it's built to bedrock. Those are areas, well, New York's not on a plate boundary, but San Francisco and Mexico City are, and they are built on sedimentary basins. So here's some images of the damage from earthquakes. So in this, you have a building that has unstable walls. You're going to shake the base of that building, and then the whole building just falls over. Here's the case of a highway that is raised up, and it's going to wobble back and forth eventually till it crashes over. Here are buildings that are just not built very well, and they're going to crumble. And then here is a building where that rebar just bends underneath the pressure of the wobble. So different ways for buildings to fail during an earthquake. Unstable ground, especially with the weight of buildings on it, can collapse. So this is an earthquake event that caused a landslide. Avalanches can also occur, rock avalanches, snow avalanches. So the material fails on that slope, and then the buildings just come with it. This is going to occur in mountainous areas. Liquefaction is a unique process, move myself there, where the ground is wet, so maybe wet mud, and when the ground shakes, water goes in between the grains, and it reduces the friction, and the mud can flow. So flowing mud would be liquefaction. During that liquefaction, there can be what they call sand volcanoes. It's not really a volcano, but sand can squirt up in between the cracks in the mud. So the material can flow, and then when it dries out, it's going to crack. Liquefaction, let me put my head over here. So these buildings are on solid ground. It shook during the earthquake. water got between the grains, the muddy ground was flowing, and the buildings topple over. Once the shaking stops, the mud just kind of locks into place. And so the building is just sunk down into mud. Fires. I mentioned the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco and how it just became this big inferno of cooking fires and gas and oil fires raging through the city. We can, if it topples candles, power lines are broken, gas mains, fuel tanks, all of that becomes this conflagration. Conflagration just means a big fire. The water mains are going to be broken, the sewer system's messed up, the electricity and the roads are destroyed. So just communicating and getting places is going to be really difficult. So the firefighters maybe can't even get to the fire, and there's so many of them it becomes overwhelming. No roads, no water, too many fires, and so it can take a big amount of organization to try to put these fires out. Tsunami. A tsunami, the term is means harbor wave, and a tsunami is going to occur when there is a displacement of the seafloor. So here's the seafloor. The seafloor either has to be popped up because of fault motion, or maybe the seafloor dropped down because of fault motion. When that occurs, the overlying water column is disturbed, and that is what becomes the center of propagation for the tsunami wave. So when it occurs, it's going to happen really fast, right? Fault motion is fast, and it's going to set up this little uplift of the sea surface. Little because it's not very high, but it's really broad. So it's a big wave distance-wise, but it's not very tall. That wave then is going to move away from itself. It's a center point, and we're going to have propagating the wave away from basically, I guess you could call it the epicenter of the focus, and then on the sea surface. Earthquakes occur underwater. The tsunami is going to move away from that earthquake. There have been about 100 destructive tsunamis, about one a year over the last 100 years. 51,000 people have died in tsunamis. That doesn't include the 250,000 that died in 2004 around Indonesia and Sumatra. So as more and more people move to the beach, there's going to be more and more tsunami disasters because plate tectonics is still happening, right? So the tsunami in deep water looks like this. It's going to be kind of a broad, not very tall wave. As it comes into the shore, it starts to stack up because the friction of the wave on the sea floor, the wave front is coming in, it starts to slow down, and that wave stacks up and up and up and up and up and pulls water from inland out to sea as the wave grows. So when it comes into the shoreline, it's now a very tall wave. They're very fast, so it would be a big surprise usually when a tsunami is going to occur. Out in deep water, you can barely notice they're there. When they come into the shoreline, they can be 10 to 15 meters tall. The 2004 earthquake really was a warning to the world that we need to pay attention to these events as more and more people move to the coastline. So here it is coming into the shoreline. These boats are getting rocked. As the wave came into the shoreline, here's a person. That's the height of the wave coming into the beach. It was the largest earthquake, that 9.0, that had occurred in 40 years. So lots and lots of people died in that event. The earthquake occurred here along this convergent plate boundary. There's a huge slip along that fault. Move my head. Huge slip along this fault. And here are the wave fronts. Yellow is the highest wave, so hitting Sri Lanka and in the area around Thailand and Indonesia, Malaysia, India, all got hit by the tsunami wave propagating from the earthquake. My head out of away. Whole parts of islands were washed away. So here's a satellite image. Here it's a green, beautiful looking tropical island, and then later when the seawater came over and it washed all the vegetation away, what was left behind died from the salt water that washed over the island. In 2011, there was an earthquake that hit on the coast, right off the coast of Japan. It was also a 9.0, and the tsunami wave began and hit the shoreline. I included in some of our files a video, so go back and find that, about the earthquake hitting at an airport and then the later tsunami rushing into to the front of the airport. So the tsunami wave began to arrive in 10 minutes, and it washed over huge villages, and that was in Japan. Here's that video. Watch this, Japan tsunami. So it's embedded in the PowerPoint, so go back and make sure you watch that. Here is the Fukushima power plant, and here are the damaged reactor buildings. They're still trying to figure out how to get in there and secure all the radioactive material. There's a 14-meter or 46 feet of water that washed over the nuclear power plant. Not a good place for a nuclear power plant, right? From the Sumatra quake and then moving on to the Japan quake, there's an international realization that we need to be aware, and more people moving to the beach need to be aware of tsunami waves way in advance. So when they're out at sea, here's a NOAA ship that is monitoring one of these buoys. We have the tsunami buoy network around the world. The people monitoring those buoys are based in Hawaii. They're tracking the Pacific earthquakes and tsunamis that are going to be generated from those. The detectors are placed either on the sea floor, or they're buoys that are just getting the size of the waves. They can sense pressure differences. So on the sea floor, the weight of the water changes, and the recorder can sound an alarm if that seems like there's a tsunami size and depth moving over it. And then also the bobbing of the buoys can be a measure of the tsunami wave. So if we can predict tsunamis, it could, obviously, if thousands of people are dying in these events, we could save those thousands of people in a tsunami event. After an earthquake occurs, there is a really tough recovery. Buildings have fallen down. The people growing the food and selling the food are having a hard time. Their houses are damaged. Water lines are damaged. It's hard to get medicines, and basic sanitation can be disrupted, trying to keep your fresh water away from your sewer, and both of those systems and that infrastructure is broken. It can be really hard. So that can usually bring about disease. Diseases can occur after a tsunami event.